Hey everybody, I'm checking out this new software to do Facebook Live every now and then, do a little Q&A. And I'm supposed to see a chat somewhere so that I can see you guys. I'm not sure where that's popping up. Please forgive me for the technical difficulties. I haven't done one of these in a really long time. I guess it's been over a year. I think the last one was around the holidays in 2016. And so I just got this new software that should make it a lot easier to do. I wanted to do this live today because it was a little bit of a hectic week with some things going on in my family, and I didn't come up with a video topic. So I thought I would just surprise you with this little Q&A. And I want to answer one question that keeps popping up a lot that I see in comments. People are asking, can two narcissists get together? And yes, they absolutely can. It's more rare. Usually what you see is the narcissist or someone on that cluster B spectrum with someone who has codependency patterns, the people-pleasing personalities. Though sometimes you might also see two narcissists together. And what happens is it's sort of like a binary star system where they revolve around each other. And that relationship only works when they have the same goal, the same agenda, like they're both trying to accomplish the same thing. And if it's very clear what the hierarchy is, because there's an alpha narc and then there's the betas. And everybody needs to know where they are in that hierarchy in order for that relationship to function, because it's entirely based upon what they need to get out of that relationship. So if you've ever seen House of Cards, that Netflix series, they really portray that with the Underwoods. They're a power couple, and often you'll see these couples like that, in places of fame, fortune, power, where they mutually support each other in this goal. And what you see throughout that series is how, as long as it's really clear that he's the alpha, I think they're both more represented as sociopaths. They're very, very covert. But what you see is as long as he's the alpha and she's, only serving him, and it's all about serving him so they can get to that position of power, which benefits her as well, because as the series goes on, you recognize how power hungry she is. But then I think it to be the third season or fourth, I don't remember where, all of a sudden that power balance gets upset. She gets this desire to overcome him, to surpass him, and that does not go over well with him. They end up kind of separating for a while. There's all this turmoil, and then the balance of power comes back and the hierarchy is clear again, and they can work towards that goal together. So that's one way that it can be portrayed. These relationships are really volatile. Very, very volatile relationships. And, some of you might even have the situation with your parents. Every now and then I have clients who say, actually, I think both of my parents are somewhere on that spectrum. And that's definitely possible. And that's really, really sad that you had, two examples of people who just couldn't love. It wasn't your fault. That's just who they are. And, if you came out of that not becoming a narcissist, great job to you, because I'm sure that's not easy. I just saw a comment pop up. Let me see if I can figure out. Oh, there, now I can see where they are. So yeah, feel free to leave questions that you guys have in the comments here. That's what I'm here doing right now, is answering some questions for you. Please don't write a long personal story. That's not what this is for. Ask a general question. I'd be happy to answer that. I just wanted to put out this surprise Q&A video for you guys. And I'm sorry to the person who wrote here. I'm only doing this in English right now, but I could definitely try to do this at some point in the future in Spanish as well. Someone's asking here, is it possible that you attract narcissists? Can you clarify? Are you saying me, or are you saying like you as in the general you, like that one attracts narcissists? Because I'm not really sure what that means. And while I'm waiting for that clarification, I wanted to mention something that I discovered this week. The reason I didn't do the video this week is because I had some issues in the family. My dad was in hospital, and I had a Hoover from my mother. And how did that happen? I had blocked her on WhatsApp. WhatsApp is an application that people use more abroad. It's not really common in the States, unless you have friends that live in other countries that lets you call and text anywhere in the world for free. And when you block someone, they can't write you personally. They can't write you personal text, and they can't call you, and vice versa. However, there is a security loophole, which I discovered. And that is if someone is adding them and you to a group chat, you will see their message. It will show up. That was really surprising this week. My dad added us to this group chat and there it turned up. So if you use WhatsApp, I would really suggest, I did the same. I went into the Apple store if you don't have an iPhone, if you have like an Android, there's some other place you go where you buy applications and you can leave like a review on that app. And I would leave a review and I would mention this security loophole and how alarming that is, because I think the more people who mention this to them, and I would use that word security because that will alarm them more, because this is unbelievable. Like if you block somebody, it's unbelievable that they can still contact you via a group message. So maybe you ran into that yourself as well. But if you use WhatsApp, I really encourage you to go in there and write that review so we can encourage them to step up those protocols so we don't have to deal with those kinds of things. That could happen in families. That could even happen if like the narcissist was part of your friends group and somebody adds you to group text and then yikes, suddenly like you see their name in there. So, all right, checking back in here on the Q&A. So people are asking, okay, she was asking, is it possible that you attract narcissists in general, that narcissists can be drawn to a particular person with a strong personality? So narcissists tend to be drawn to people who are people pleasers, like to people who will put their own needs and feelings aside to meet someone else's needs and feelings. And that tends to be what happens. Though it can be anybody, like anybody can be a target of a psychopath, especially a sociopath, narcissist. However, they do tend to have a radar also for vulnerabilities. That's what I've noticed in the few clients that I've had that didn't come from a family history with these patterns, was they went through some major loss, like maybe someone died or they went through a really traumatizing divorce or something happened where they felt really vulnerable. And just like a shark can smell blood a mile away in the water, that's what these types do. They will sniff out that vulnerability. So it doesn't mean that you're weak, because often they will prey upon strong individuals, like many codependents. That word codependency is kind of such a sham because it has this word dependency, and it doesn't mean that you're necessarily a dependent person. You might be very independent. You might be fiercely independent and still be a people pleaser, right? And so they can prey upon just that nature that you have to give the benefit of the doubt to others, to give of yourself to others, to put your own needs and feelings aside in order to be there for someone else. That's why they prey upon these personalities. And also empathy. I mean, they're definitely looking for empathy, because if you have empathy, you're going to give them that benefit of the doubt. You're going to have a conscience. That's where empathy comes from, is the human conscience. If you don't have a conscience, like the case of narcissists, psychopaths, and sociopaths, or their conscience isn't working right, then that's why they don't have empathy. They don't have the capacity for that. They don't have the capacity to feel guilt. That's why they do whatever they do, and they don't feel that sense of shame for having done, that sense of guilt for having hurt someone. Where if you have a healthy conscience and you do something wrong, like, you're going to feel that. It's going to feel heavy. It's going to feel awful. You're going to feel bad. You're going to want to make it right. So they prey upon people who have maybe even a sense of hyper consciousness, where you're very, very careful not to hurt somebody and to help other people and to always being and doing good in the world. They definitely love those personalities. And I think they have a very keen ability, whether it's conscious or unconscious, to assess that in people when they meet. They're immediately assessing, what can I get from this person? How much can I get from this person? And they start to give you those little tests. There's a YouTube channel called Be Good. I think it's Be Good 4000 or 2000. James is the guy's name. He's great. He does like cartoon videos. He has amazing insight into these characters. And he talks about the do-do test. And that's when they do this. They test you. It's like they shit on you a little bit, just a little bit at the beginning, to see how much you're going to take, how much benefit of the doubt you're going to extend to them, what you're going to be willing to put up with, what you're going to be willing to forgive and keep going back for more. So those are a lot of the common characteristics that they're looking for. Someone's asking, why does the narcissist not hoover? Okay, why do they not hoover? Well, it could be many reasons. One of them could be that you figured them out and you called them out. Like when they know that you called them out, they don't want to come back because they know you're on to them. They're not going to get that supply. The whole deal for them, they're completely addicted to narcissistic supply. That's what they want from you, from every target that they find. And so if they know like you're not going to give it to them, like you've got them blocked, you're going to ignore them, you're going to call out their shit, they're just not going to go to you. They want a much easier victim. They want somebody who's not on to them yet. It could be that they're also temporarily not hoovering, like they've secured the next primary supply and they're getting all the supply they need from that person at the moment. So they're not coming back to you. People often ask, well, like how long? Like what's like the time frame on that? I mean, it could be years. Like the longest Hoover I personally ever had was like 5 years. It could be months, it could be weeks, it could be years. If that person thinks there's any shred of doubt that maybe, just maybe, they can get a little bit of supply from you, and that tends to be when their supply sources are running dry. Like their primary supply is not being cooperative. They're setting boundaries. They went on vacation. Like they're prioritizing their own needs for the moment. Like something else is disrupting that supply for them. They start going through their Rolodex looking for who they can prey upon. They're always going to go to an ex or someone that was in their life, someone they've already invested all of that abuse training in, because that person is primed. They're much more likely to give that supply with the least amount of energy investment for the narcissist versus going out and having to conquer a whole new source of supply. Yeah, someone else said we attract narcs based on childhood programming. That is the vast majority of cases. I mean, I would say it's probably like 97 some percent. Like it's very high. Most of the time when people say, oh, that didn't happen to me, what I've discovered with my clients is that's usually when they're in stage 1 of the healing and they just haven't recognized those patterns in childhood, because it's very, very, very hard to accept that your mother or your father was one of these characters. That realization tends to happen in the later part of stage 1 and definitely into stage 2. Though, as I mentioned earlier, there are those few cases where this didn't happen growing up, or it wasn't something similar, because it could happen, when the parent was an addict or an alcoholic or somehow emotionally unavailable, or maybe a parent died or was really sick and absent. Like there could be all these like nuanced things. The feeling wound is the same. That feeling wound of loneliness or rejection, that's the core. Like that's the wound that ends up attracting these people. Why we perceive that as acceptable is because it looks like love. If that's how mommy and daddy, or mommy or daddy, modeled love, then that's what we accept from people. That's just how so-and-so is. That was how mom is. That's how so-and-so is. And we end up attracting that. But like I said, there are those cases in adulthood where people just go through this massive loss, or something major happens that makes them feel so raw and vulnerable. And that's what these types will smell like, shark to blood. And they'll prey upon those people. And it could be the very first time they've ever met one of these characters, because anybody could be a victim. You're welcome. Thanks, guys. Okay, someone's asking here, they were talking about going through the dark night of the soul for 5 years now with the narcissist abuse recovery. And she's talking about people temporarily being in her life. How do I get out of the mindset of not caring to meet people because they will only be in my life temporarily? So yeah, understand there's a saying, I don't know who said it. Some people come into your life for a reason, some come in for a season, some come in for a lifetime. And I think that's our job, to discern that when we meet people. Like, who is this person? Like, are they here for the long haul, or are they just here for the temporary, moments, weeks, months, years? Like, personally, I believe that people come into our life to teach us something. It's a learning opportunity. Everything is a learning opportunity, no matter how devastating it is and how challenging it is to recover. There's something beneficial in there that we can learn from. That, of course, is very difficult to see in the initial aftermath. But later on, we end up being able to pull out those treasures and gifts. So I think, approaching people as, how can I grow from this experience? What can I learn from you? What can we teach one another? How can we mutually benefit each other's lives? And accept that, well, basically everything in life is temporary. That is the nature of life. We're all going to die someday. And even every new life, I think it was Jason, what is his name? Oh, I'm sorry. I think it's Jason. I forget, blanking on his name right now. He does all these videos called Shots of Awe. And he talks about like love, like when you meet someone and you fall in love, it's amazing. And it's also so sad because the moment you start to feel love for someone, it's already gone. Like either you're going to die or they're going to die or you're going to break up or life is going to drive you apart. Like one way or another, it is going to end. It is temporary. Everything in life is temporary. And I think that also then calls upon that sense of gratitude for every moment that you have with someone. Maybe you meet someone really wonderful and for whatever reason, life just orchestrates these events and they go away or you go away and that's that. But you gain something wonderful, even though it's really sad and devastating and you pass through that grieving process. It could be temporary that you're talking about, like maybe you meet people and then like you suddenly realize they're toxic and they've got to go. That's good too. It's good that you're recognizing, okay, here's my standards. I have standards. I have self-worth. I have the confidence to uphold these standards and to cut people out of my life when they're not meeting those standards. So have gratitude for your growth. Recognize in the years, months past, you might have allowed that person or that behavior in your life, but you're learning and you're growing. And so as you're releasing that person from your life because they're not good for you, have gratitude and appreciation to yourself and the hard work that you're doing to up-level your standards and your self-worth. Someone's asking here, why do I continue to feel so guilty that I will completely destroy him when I leave? Okay, yeah, that's a big concern for a lot of people who are still in these relationships, is that sense of guilt. There's a website called Out of the Fog. Fog stands for fear, obligation, guilt, right? And that's why people stay. Check out that website if you haven't seen it, by the way. It's fantastic. They give a lot of definitions of the concepts and the terminologies and everything. And that guilt is so heavy. I mean, it's the heaviest in familial relationships, but it can also be very heavy in a romantic or even a friendship or even a work situation. So how do you get over that guilt? Is you get to the point where you prioritize your health, your sanity, your well-being. You value yourself so much that you are able to make that cut because this is for the better. This is for your health, your sanity, and your well-being, and that has to be priority number one for you. If you don't have your health, your sanity, your well-being, you have nothing in life. You have nothing. You don't have your house, you don't have your apartment because you can't pay the bills or you can't pay the mortgage or the rent. You can't buy food. You can't continue to do your job. You can't maintain relationships, friendships, perform well in life. Right? So that's why it's your number one priority. And if you've been trained, especially since childhood, to put other people's needs and feelings first, it's going to feel really hard to prioritize your health, your sanity, and your well-being over someone else, to override that sense of guilt. If you have that hyper conscientiousness that I was talking about earlier, it's going to be really hard to override that. But when you value that first, that decision will be easier. Someone says, how do you get them out of your heart and mind once you've separated after 34 years? So how do you get them out of your mind and your heart? This is one of the big pieces of the self-healing process, is what I call reprogramming the self-talk. Huge. Because when you've been in a long relationship with someone, even a few months really, but the longer the relationship, the more the effects on you. The narcissist creates a negativity paradigm. That's actually the worst thing that they do because that's what stays with you long after they're gone. That negativity paradigm becomes your reality. Like your perspective creates your reality, right? So you want to upgrade your perspective so that you shift your reality. And it's almost magic how that happens. As you shift your perspective, which is your belief systems, how you see the world, how you see yourself, how you see yourself interacting in the world, that completely starts shifting your reality. So you want to work on that. And how do you do that? You notice the self-talk. That's that voice, the inner dialogue that's consistently running in the background. It's always narrating your experience. Start paying attention to that. Start noticing the thoughts that are coming by constantly. It's always there. Like some people think that it's not there. Oh, it's there. Pay attention to it and notice what are the negative thoughts. And as soon as the negative thought comes by, immediately delete and cancel it and reprogram it with something positive. So what you're going to notice in the case of having internalized all the abuse after all those years is you start talking to yourself the way the narcissists talk to you. You're putting yourself down because you've internalized those messages. Or it's just in the way you see the world, because often they have this view of like it's fear-based or it's negativity-based, or you got all these messages of you can't, you're not good enough. All those messages need to be reprogrammed. In order to do that, you've got to become aware of those thoughts. And then you have to be like a mental ninja all day long, reprogramming these. This is huge work at the beginning. It takes a massive amount of effort. And I talked about this in my new book, The Journey, how important this is to keep going through this process no matter how hard it is. Because after the few weeks, you're going to notice like a big reduction in that negativity. After the first month, a lot of reduction. By months 2 and 3, as you're doing this consistently on a daily basis, what you're going to notice is all that negativity that was once automatic, like it just automatically ran the negativity program. You want to do something, you want to accomplish something, that voice kicks in and it sabotages you and tells you why you can't and all this stuff, right? What you're going to notice is now you have a positivity programming that's kicking in automatically. Like you no longer have to be so consciously aware of reprogramming every thought because your subconscious is now on board. So remember, your conscious mind, if you think of an iceberg, your conscious mind is like that 10%, maybe 12% on top of the water. That massive part, that 88 to 90% below the water, what you're not aware of, that's your subconscious. And that's what's driving you in life. It's what's driving your behavior, your emotions, your life experiences. It's what's magnetizing to you things in life, because that's how life works. So the reprogramming is actually reprogramming the subconscious. Initially, you're using the conscious mind to reprogram the subconscious. Eventually, your subconscious gets on board and it just starts running that program. And that's when your life massively changes. Massively. So that's a really important part of the self-healing process after narcissistic abuse. Someone says, is it possible somehow to sum up the healing steps? Well, there's a lot of things that take place. I've broken it down into three stages for you in my book, and then 12 sub-stages or phases within those. And I've modeled those 12 stages and 3 phases after Joseph Campbell's work. He did the hero's journey. So I've applied it. So we've got the victim stage, the survivor stage, the thriver stage. So victim stage is stage 1, where you're totally disempowered. Right? It's all out of your control. You're just either you're still in the relationship or you're out of the relationship, but you're still living in the patterns and you haven't grabbed yet the reins of your destiny in your hands to take that self-responsibility, to leap over that first threshold to get into the survivor stage. So I think probably the majority of people who are tuning into the YouTube channels on these topics, the majority of people I think are in stage 1. Where they haven't quite grabbed the reins yet. Like everything still feels out of control. Once you realize you have that power, and in fact, it's your responsibility. And I posted that video from Will Smith the other day, and he's talking on this, like that shift there. That's the self-responsibility shift, where you realize, it wasn't your fault. But if you just stay stuck in the blame, you're not going to get anywhere. You're not going to get out of that suffering. You're not going to be able to transform your life and create the life that you actually want to live. And that's why it's so important. And essentially that is a perspective shift. So when we talked about shifting your perspective, then shifting your reality, stage 1 to stage 2, that first threshold is a perspective shift. And that's what has to take place for you to get to that next stage. So that's why it's so important to recognize that it wasn't your fault what happened. That's the major thing you got to understand in stage 1. It wasn't your fault, but You are the only one who can do something about it now. You are the only one who can transform it now. It's in your hands. What are you going to do with it? And that's when you get into stage 2. So stage 1, people often have that CPTSD crash where you don't function. Like, you don't get out of bed. Like you get to that moment where you hit the bottom of the bottom. You can't get out of bed. You don't want to shower. You don't want to take care of yourself. You don't want to eat. You don't want to see anybody. Like, all of this sort of happens, and that could go on for weeks where like you basically just need to check out of life for a little while because you can't function. That's when you really need a licensed therapist who is very skilled and knowledgeable in PTSD and CPTSD and these abuse matters to help you through those really difficult, challenging symptoms, like the massive panic attacks that you're going to get, the massive anxiety, the dread attacks, like out of nowhere, you just get into this like kind of sort of feeling where you're just terrified. Like you can't even put your finger on what exactly, right? And it's so disempowering to be stuck in there when the symptoms are so intense. So get yourself help. There's no shame in that. Get yourself help. But then eventually you get into the second stage. Now that you've got the reins of your destiny in your hand, you're taking the self-responsibility. Now you're really digging in. Now you're really doing the self-care work. That is the longest part of the whole process. And so that's the part I think where people can get stuck for a really, really, really long time. I myself was stuck in there for years before I ended up shifting out of there. And so that's where the inner child work also takes place. So in stage 2 is when we really have to dig into, where did this come from in childhood? How did the wound of childhood somehow relate to what's going on now and to these adult relationships? That's where all the massive reprogramming that I was talking about earlier takes place. That's when you're dealing with all of these symptoms that are coming up. You're starting to redefine your boundaries. Like stage 1, maybe you're learning the boundary of no, and you're starting to say no more often because that's something that was probably really hard. Stage 2 is next level boundaries, next level standards. Now your self-worth is really coming up. So I don't want to take too long to dwell on this one topic, but there are 3 stages. And it's really important to take the reins of your destiny in your hands, to take that self-responsibility to get over that first threshold and that first hurdle. I think that's where the majority of people are still stuck and unable to transform their lives because they're still stuck in that disempowerment. You want to empower yourself to get into stage 2 and then really dive into the self-care work. Someone's saying, if someone shows no empathy, but no other narc red, does it mean that they are personality disordered or have narc traits? If someone shows no empathy, okay. So if someone doesn't have empathy, that's a massive red flag. I think you don't need to get caught up in exactly where they fit, in those cluster B personality disorders. But if you see someone doesn't have empathy, that could be caused by a brain injury, by various other things, right? That aside, that's a red flag. Okay, if you don't feel their empathy, and I don't mean cognitive empathy because, predators, especially the really advanced types, they can be so skilled at feigning cognitive empathy. And it looks like empathy, but it's just cognitive. It's just mental. It's like mental masturbation. It's not real. It's not empathy that you feel in your body, right? Where like you feel someone, like when someone's sad, you're sad, like in some ways, like, of course you have to set boundaries, right? But like you can feel that when you have empathy. So if somebody doesn't have empathy and they're showing you that, and look for the little signs, like people will show you this in little ways, and it's not through the words, it's through the actions. Because again, the words are more likely to be the cognitive empathy, the flattery, the idealization, the love bombing. Look for the actions. Like, okay, this happened the other day. The sun was in my eyes. It was in my eyes and not the other person's eyes. And he just reached over and covered my eyes to block the sun. That was empathy. That was an example of him feeling empathy, right? So notice those little things. Those little things are going to reveal, does the person have empathy or not? And if you're not getting any signs of empathy, or like you're telling them a story and they're just like, they're not there, like they're not connected at all, or they're totally minimizing like what you went through. Though, of course, sometimes people can minimize, maybe, all right, I'm going to take that back, because some people can minimize things just because they don't understand. But if you're telling someone a story and they're just not feeling you and the pain or the struggle that you went through in that story, and they're not like, empathizing with you in any way, that should be a red flag. I would start to really pay attention and really evaluate, does that person show any empathy? And if they don't, I would take a big step back. You don't want to be around people who don't have empathy. That's inevitable harm. And again, it may not be their fault. They may not be personality disordered. They might have a brain injury or some of the thing. Here's another thing is in the early stages of PTSD, you might have noticed this, where you reach the emotional threshold of your own suffering and pain, and you cannot take on the pain of someone else. You just can't be there for them. Like, you might love your best friend, your cousin, your brother, whatever, and they're coming to you with something and you're just like, I just can't be there for you right now because there's too much. I can't process everything I'm going through because I'm in that early stage of PTSD recovery and I can't be there for you. Like, that's the numbness stage. And so that could be another moment where this could be a really good person. They just could be going through so much of their own that they can't be there for you in that moment because they need to do the internal work in order to be there for you. So that could show up as well, but still in that case, have patience with that person, have empathy for that person, but recognize it's not where you're going to find empathy at the moment. Excuse me. Excuse me. Jason Silva. Thank you, honey. That's my virtual assistant, honey. Jason Silva was the guy I mentioned earlier. The shots of awe. Those are really great. Thanks, guys, for all these wonderful comments. Okay, someone's asking, my ex was extremely violent towards me. Is narcissism the same as psychopath? No. You're saying, should I still worry when he gets out? Okay. If there's physical violence, you may need to take some precautions. I would recommend reading the book, The Gift of Fear by Gavin DeBecker, former FBI agent. He was a specialist in violent behavior and understanding it and preventing it and in taking precautions in the case of it actually happening. I would read that book, first of all. I would recommend everybody read that book. That book changed my life. And he will help you understand, because sometimes getting a restraining order, or what they call in England, I think, non-molestation order, sometimes that could actually make the situation worse because that piece of paper is not going to protect you. Sometimes if the person cares about their reputation, they don't want to go to jail, they care about how people perceive them, they'll respect the restraining order. Sometimes some people just don't respect it. They just don't. And sometimes that's when, he describes in the book how a lot of women especially have died with that paper in their purse, because they just didn't respect the law around that. So I would take precautions. Like if your ex or someone, was violent, you need to hide your address. If you need to move, I would move as soon as possible, even if you own your home. I know that's so uprooting, and maybe you got kids and stuff. You have an 8-year-old son. So maybe he has to have some custody. I don't know how that works and all, but if there's any way that you can hide your address, that you can work with legal counsel, I would absolutely get legal counsel. I'm not going to give you legal counsel. I would absolutely seek out legal counsel in your local area, someone who has experience with high conflict divorce and custody issues, to know what your rights and your responsibilities are. If he's entitled to any kind of supervised or other sort of visitation with the child. But if there's any way you can hide your address, that's the best. If you live in America, go to the UPS store. That's not the post office. A UPS store, and pay for a mailbox. And what will happen is you will get an address that looks like an apartment number, but it's the UPS store. And have all of your mail going there. I mean, not one piece of mail goes to your physical address. Your driver's license, your car registration, everything, every time anybody asks your address on a doctor's form, on anything, you write the UPS address. That way, if that person goes to the UPS store, they find the UPS store, they never find you. That's the best way to hide yourself in America. I don't know how it works in other countries. If you live in other countries, I would seek out a private investigator, a private detective who knows the way of the local land, and they could give you some advice in terms of how to hide your address the best way possible. If this person absolutely knows where you live, you can't get around that. You want to invest in a security system So at least you have warning. Get a dog, get a big dog, get some cameras, get a house alarm, take some steps in that way that you can help yourself feel better. Get yourself into a self-defense course so that you're not terrified walking around town. You learn some very helpful movements. If someone should grab you in certain ways and what you do to get out of that, that's going to surprise the shit out of that person if you didn't know anything like that and suddenly you pull out some of those moves. So you want to empower yourself with that kind of information. Big hug to you guys too. Someone asked, why do narcissists get married? I'm going to answer a couple more questions and then I'm going to get out of here. Venus is looking at me like it's dinner time. Why do narcissists get married? Do they treat the new person they're marrying better? This is such a common question. I'm so glad you asked this. Why do they get married? Some of them do, some of them don't, right? Some of them, the marriage serves them because they want to look good. They want to look like the family man or the family woman or, the good Christian or the good whatever religion or the good person in society, and it makes them look stable. And it also locks in the victim. Because then the victim is like, wow, it's not so easy to leave. I can't just go away. There's this whole marriage contract, and divorce, and that's expensive, and they could take me for this or that. So you really get in there a lot deeper. They secure the supply also in that way. And also because the more dependent narcissists will do this, like the ones who are more dependent on that primary source of narcissistic supply, knowing that you're always going to be there, and they will really seek out, they will do the long con. I think it was Jackson McKenzie in Psychopath Free that will describe the temporary supply and the long-term supply. And so the narcissist that marries the victim is looking for the long-term supply. They want you there for years and decades, maybe. So, they do the long con. That love bombing stage is a lot longer. They're putting in a lot more investment at the beginning because they're planning on keeping you around a lot longer. The narcissists that don't marry, that don't want that kind of commitment because they just want to be, moving on to next, they don't put in that much of an investment at the beginning. And that famous question here, do they treat the new person better than the last? Whether they marry them or not, no. It is always the same because that is who the narc is. That's who they are. Of course, they're going to vary the way that their mask shows up and the way that they present themselves based on how they're mirroring that particular person. They're going to do that inventory. They're going to copy. They're going to paste. And they're going to look like the perfect match for that next person. And that could be the polar opposite of what they did to you. If you've ever talked to, another ex of your ex, what you might find is like it was the exact opposite. Like maybe that person was sexually aggressive with you and sexually abusive, but with the other person, they were withdrawing sex because they wanted to make her feel self-conscious about her weight. So it looks totally opposite, but it's the same thing. It's still abuse at the end, right? And it's still devastating on the target. One is not worse than the other. So they'll change their tactics, of course. And of course, they're going to go on social media and they're going to paste photos and videos and statuses. Don't look at that stuff because it's going to make you sick because you're going to think that it's so much better for that person, that they're so much happier. Maybe they finally found that one person that gets along with them. No, it doesn't happen. It's always the same, just over and over and over again. It's always going to be that. They're always looking for that next supply. And maybe they're totally infatuated with that person at the beginning. It's going to get old. They're going to need the next supply and the next supply. It's never good enough. Nothing, no one is ever good enough. You could be the most perfect human being if such a thing existed, and it still wouldn't be good enough for these people. So no, it's never better. Let yourself off the hook. That part of you that wonders that feels sad about that looks at social media or hears stories through the grapevine, just let yourself know it's no better. It's no better. And just be so grateful that that's not you anymore. Be so, so grateful. As painful as it is, be grateful that's not you anymore. So I am going to wrap this up for today. Thank you all so much for showing up and for participating. And I'm sending you all a big hug. Have a wonderful weekend. Bye.